My name is Geraldine Monroe. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how my parents tried to erase my autonomy when I refused to bankroll my golden child brother, only to have their entire scheme collapse when I dropped $1. It started on. I remember because I'd just come out of a quarterly board meeting where I'd presented a new growth strategy to our international partners. Applause, smiles, handshakes. That kind of morning. I was still running high on the adrenaline of success when it was a text from my mother. Call me immediately. It's urgent. It's about your brother. I sighed, the buzz of confidence fading fast. Every time it was urgent, it involved money. And every time it was about your brother, it meant they needed me to fix another one of his messes. His name is Connor. 3 years younger than me, a walking excuse wrapped in charm and half-truths. My parents, Joseph and Diana Monroe, had built a system around him. A cushion of denial and delusion, sewn together with my sacrifices. Still in my tailored navy suit, heels clicking across the polished marble floor, I stepped into the privacy pod in the corner of our executive lounge and made the call. Geraldine, my mother said, skipping hello. Connor needs a short-term infusion of funds. Just until his app launches. There it was. How much? Only $70,000. It's not like you can't afford it. Only. I let the silence stretch, watching my own reflection in the glass. Calm. Polished. Untouched by chaos. But inside? My stomach churned. I'm not giving Connor any more money. You're his sister. And he's a grown man. One who's failed at 3 startups already. He's an innovator. A risk taker. No, Mom. He's irresponsible. And I'm not your emergency ATM. The line went quiet for a beat. Then my mother's voice hardened. You've changed. I didn't answer. Because I had. I had built a life on discipline, sacrifice, and grit. I wasn't about to set it on fire to enable someone else's fantasy. That night, I thought it was over. I was wrong. 3 days later, I came home to a manila envelope waiting at my door. Certified mail. I tore it open and froze. The words on the first page blurred as I read them again and again. Petition for conservatorship on grounds of mental incapacity and financial instability. Filed by Joseph and Diana Monroe. My parents. They weren't just angry. They were trying to declare me unfit. Legally. So they could seize control over my assets. My accounts. My independence. It felt like I'd been sucker punched. The petition claimed I was paranoid, erratic, and suffering from delusional episodes. That I'd cut off all communication with family, refused financial obligations, and made irrational financial decisions, all signs, they claimed, of mental decline. I dropped the papers onto my kitchen counter, staring blankly ahead as my mind unraveled. My parents were trying to legally erase me because I said no. They wanted to punish me not with silence, but with legal shackles. I spent the night digging through old emails, voicemails, texts, anything that showed how long I'd been their safety net. Anything that exposed their pattern of manipulation. My apartment filled with the glow of laptop screens and phone recorders. But it wasn't just digital breadcrumbs I had. There was a box. Under my bed. A battered shoebox I hadn't touched in years, filled with printed emails, receipts, even a flash drive with audio files. I'd saved them over the years like a survivor hoarding breadcrumbs in a forest. I didn't know why then. I knew now. I needed help. So I called the one person I trusted, Olivia Chen. My old college roommate and now a high-profile civil litigation attorney in D.C. Liv, I said, voice shaking. I need you. She arrived the next afternoon. Dark jeans, black blazer, and that usual no-nonsense gleam in her eyes. As she spread the documents across my dining table, her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to fury. "This is a strategic ambush," she said. "They've been planning this." "I thought so." She tapped a line in the petition. "They cite questionable parentage here." "What's that about?" I looked down. A faint buzz started in my ears. "What?" "Right here. They say your emotional instability may stem from identity issues tied to biological ambiguity." "What the hell is that?" I remembered a whisper. A memory buried under years of silence. My mother, once during a fight in my teens, had hissed, "You should be grateful we even kept you." Olivia sat up straighter. "I'm ordering a DNA test," she said flatly. "You're not just going to defend yourself. You're going to dismantle whatever house of cards they built." I nodded. And for the first time in days, I felt the slightest flicker of something like strength. By Monday, we had filed a motion to dismiss the conservatorship as baseless. But the real blow hadn't landed yet. Not until I opened that DNA envelope. It arrived on a Tuesday. Simple. Clinical. Sealed. I sat alone in my kitchen, hands trembling as I peeled it open. Paternity excluded. The man I had called Dad my entire life, Joseph Monroe, was not my biological father. A rush of wind knocked through me. Not anger. Not relief. Just clarity. They had built a lie around me. And now I held the truth. The next day, I called Olivia. "It's time," I said. "Let's burn it all down." I always thought betrayal would come with yelling, broken dishes, doors slammed so hard they rattled off the hinges. But what I felt the day we walked into that courtroom wasn't loud. It was quiet. A cold, bitter quiet that settled deep into my chest like frostbite. It was the pre-trial hearing. My parents sat at the petitioner's table, my mother in a beige silk suit, my father with his favorite navy tie. Both looked pristine. Untouched. Like two professionals about to give a keynote at a conference, not pleased to have their adult daughter legally stripped of her rights. Connor wasn't there. Of course not. He never showed up for the messes he started. Just reaped the rewards when others cleaned it up. Olivia sat beside me, poised and deadly in her black heels and crimson blouse, a folder thick with files laid out before her. The judge glanced over the documents we'd submitted, the audio recordings, the texts, the emails. Enough to show a clear pattern of coercion and pressure. But then came their attorney. David L. Brandt. Gray hair, golden cufflinks, and a voice so smooth it could have been poured into a wineglass. "Your Honor," he began, "this petition was filed out of concern. Genuine concern. Ms. Monroe has recently severed all ties with her family, refuses to engage in rational discussion, and has acted, erratically, with clear financial recklessness. By not handing over $70,000? Olivia cut in smoothly. Hardly a psychiatric emergency. Brandt didn't blink. It wasn't about the amount. It was about the tone. The anger. The hostility. I wanted to laugh. They had spent 30 years suppressing my voice, and now the second I used it, they called it rage. When the judge paused to review the documentation, Olivia leaned over and whispered, "We're just getting started. The real case comes next. This is just their opening act." I nodded, but in my gut, I knew something else was waiting. After court, I found the courage to call someone I'd barely spoken to since high school, Aunt Rosa. She was my mother's sister. The black sheep of the family. We hadn't seen her in over a decade. When I called, she picked up after 2 rings. "Geraldine?" Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't think I'd ever hear from you." "I need to know something," I said. "Did my mom ever say anything strange? About me? About Dad?" There was a long silence. Then Rosa sighed. "Your mom always did whatever she had to in order to protect appearances. You were born during a very tense time. I remember overhearing her and your grandmother arguing about names on the birth certificate. But I wasn't allowed in the room. I closed my eyes. She changed it, didn't she? She changed a lot of things. You weren't supposed to know. I hung up the phone and sat there, in the middle of my apartment, hands shaking. They had built their entire case around the idea that I was unstable, while hiding the fact that I wasn't even legally Joseph Monroe's child. But I wasn't just planning to disprove them. I was going to expose them. Olivia and I went into overdrive. We subpoenaed documents, contacted labs, traced trust fund distributions. We even filed for a financial audit of my father's accounts. And that's when we found it. A shell corporation called Elbridge Solutions, opened in Connor's name, but funded directly through withdrawals from Joseph's estate accounts. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Vanished. And guess who had approved the transfers? My mother. She had full financial power of attorney. They weren't trying to declare me unfit to protect me. They were trying to strip me of my autonomy to protect themselves. If the court handed them control of my finances, they could cover the transfers. Hide the fraud. Clean up their mess, again, while painting me as unstable. When Olivia laid out the paper trail on her conference table, she smiled slowly. They're going to regret filing that petition. But even with the audit, we needed something personal. Something irrefutable. Something emotional that couldn't be spun by a defense attorney with a $300 haircut. That's when I remembered someone. Connor's ex. Sophia Bennett. They dated for 3 years. She'd lived with our family for one of them. And then, suddenly, she vanished. I found her on LinkedIn. She was working in Columbus now. Real estate. When I sent her a message, she responded with just 3 words. I've been waiting. We met in a small cafe on a rainy Wednesday afternoon. She looked different. Softer. Quieter. But when I said my name, her eyes lit up with something between pity and rage. I left because your mother told me to, she said. She said I was ruining Connor's focus. But really, I think she just didn't want anyone seeing the truth up close. What truth? Sophia reached into her bag and pulled out a phone. I saved this, she said. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd need it one day. She pressed play. The audio was grainy, but the voices were clear. Connor. Screaming. Slurring. Demanding Sophia transfer money from her savings account. And then, my mother's voice. Calm. Icy. If she loves you, she'll do it. If not, she's disposable. Just like everyone else. I sat frozen. She didn't even try to protect the girl living in her home. Because money, not people, was what mattered most. Will you testify? I asked. Sophia stared into her coffee. Then nodded once. I don't want anyone else to go through what I did. As I walked back into the storm, a strange peace settled over me. They'd started this war with confidence, believing I would fold. But now? I had witnesses. Evidence. And blood that didn't belong to them. Next was court. And this time, I wasn't coming to defend. I was coming to destroy. We were exactly 2 weeks out from the full conservatorship hearing when everything began to accelerate. Olivia, methodical as ever, now had 3 assistants helping her organize our evidence into binders, each labeled with color-coded tabs, timestamps, and legal notations. My once quiet apartment now resembled a war room. Court transcripts, birth records, audio recordings, financial documents. It wasn't just a defense. It was a takedown. Still, Olivia knew something I hadn't fully admitted: we needed more than evidence. We needed a narrative. Judges don't just look at facts, they look at character, pattern, motive. So she asked me one night, "What is your mom's story?" What drives her to do this? I stared at the ceiling for a long time before answering. She only cares about legacy. Appearances. Being in control. My existence, my success, was always something to manage, not celebrate. It came out so easily I almost scared myself. But it was true. Every good thing I'd ever done, every accolade, every promotion, was either ignored or weaponized. And now, because I stopped playing the perfect daughter, they wanted me erased. That weekend, Olivia and I drove to Columbus. We had an appointment with someone we'd only confirmed 2 days prior, through a call Olivia made using an old contact from her clerkship days. Her name was Evelyn Hart. She had been my family's estate lawyer up until a few years ago. She now worked independently, mostly helping families update their trusts and medical directives. When we arrived at her office, modest, wood-paneled, stacked with old law books, she greeted us with a nervous smile. "I didn't think I'd see that name again," she said. We sat down. Olivia explained the situation. Evelyn listened quietly, occasionally tapping her pen against a yellow legal pad. "Carolyn, your mother, was always strategic," Evelyn said at last. "When she had you legally listed under Joseph's name, it wasn't for sentiment. It was about access." "To the family trust," I said. Evelyn nodded. "Exactly. Joseph's father, your so-called grandfather, set up a multi-generational trust decades ago. Strictly for legal heirs. Carolyn amended your birth certificate to get you on that list. The trust required periodic verifications. That's why she kept you so close. And when I pulled away? She panicked. Because with you gone, she loses leverage." Olivia leaned in. "Can you testify?" Evelyn hesitated. "I'd need to be subpoenaed. But if I'm compelled, I'll tell the truth." I exhaled. "That's all we need." As we drove back, I stared out the window, watching the Ohio landscape pass by, gray skies, skeletal trees. My thoughts drifted to Connor. I hadn't seen him in months. The last time we spoke, he was asking for $40,000 over text like he was ordering a pizza. I wondered if he even knew what our parents were really doing. Whether he realized the petition they filed could strip me of my identity, my bank access, even my ability to sign a lease without court approval. Or maybe he just didn't care. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. From a blocked number. It was his voice. "Hey. I know things got crazy, but maybe we can talk? Mom says you're being dramatic, and this whole court thing is just a misunderstanding. I don't want us to be enemies, Geraldine. I just want the family to be whole again." I deleted the message without flinching. Because this wasn't just about a fight. This was about a system I'd been born into, a machine fueled by silence, denial, and a transactional definition of love. And I was done playing the part. 1 week before the hearing, Olivia filed a motion to introduce the DNA results. Not just as a defense, but as a game changer. Under Ohio law, non-biological parents can only petition for guardianship under strict conditions, and Joseph didn't meet them. And if the DNA proved I was never his daughter, it meant the entire foundation of their petition collapsed. The judge approved it. Suddenly, everything changed. The court would now consider the petition's validity not just from a mental health standpoint, but from a fraudulent standing angle. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat in my living room, every light off, holding the laminated DNA report in my hand. 3 words kept echoing in my head. Paternity excluded, 0% match. The man I grew up calling Dad was not my father. It should have shattered me. But strangely, it didn't. It freed me. Because for the first time, I had proof that the system I'd been trapped in wasn't about love. It was about control. Appearances. Access. And that meant walking away wasn't betrayal. It was survival. I closed my eyes and whispered into the dark, "You tried to erase me. But I'm the one holding the pen now." The next morning, I dressed in silence. Charcoal gray pantsuit. No jewelry. Hair pulled back in a low, professional bun. I didn't need to be flashy. I just needed to be undeniable. We entered courtroom 5 at 9:01 a.m. My parents were already seated. My mother wore a pastel blazer, pearls, and that same manufactured expression she used at dinner parties, the kind that said, "We're fine. We're the perfect family." Connor was there this time. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The judge, Honorable Evelyn Wade, entered precisely at 9:07. She was known for being fair, but fierce. And she didn't tolerate games. "Let's begin," she said. What followed was a slow, steady unraveling of every lie they had built. Their attorney presented the same arguments: emotional instability, irrational decisions, alleged hostility. Then Olivia stood. What she did next wasn't a defense. It was an autopsy. She introduced the recordings. The texts. The money trails. She called Evelyn Hart to testify, who confirmed the fraudulent intent behind my amended birth certificate. She submitted the DNA report. And then, she played one final clip. My mother's voice. "If she refuses again, we go the legal route. Call it concern. Say she's not well. Once we have control, we can access everything. She'll calm down when she realizes she has no choice." The courtroom went silent. The judge turned to my mother. "Mrs. Monroe. Is this your voice?" She didn't answer. So the judge repeated it. And my mother, cold, poised, polished, nodded once. Yes. I didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Because I knew what was coming next. The silence after my mother's admission felt like a vacuum. Even the sound of the judge writing notes on her legal pad seemed deafening. No one in the courtroom moved. My father's face was stone. Connor stared straight ahead like a child caught in the wrong classroom, pretending if he stayed still long enough, he might vanish. Judge Wade cleared her throat and looked up, her gaze sharp. "This court does not take lightly the abuse of conservatorship petitions. Ms. Monroe," she said, nodding at Olivia, "please proceed with your remaining exhibits." Olivia didn't hesitate. She walked to the front of the courtroom and laid a thick binder on the bench. "This contains notarized records of bank transfers, over $120,000, moved by Carolyn Monroe into a shell company, Elbridge Solutions. The listed beneficiary is Connor Monroe. The funds were drawn in part from a joint marital account under the name Joseph Monroe, and the remainder from an account originally intended for Geraldine Monroe." She looked directly at the judge. "There was a financial motive, Your Honor. This petition was filed not out of concern, but to prevent Ms. Monroe from discovering financial misconduct and reclaiming her rightful assets." The judge nodded slowly. "And do you have evidence connecting this shell company to either petitioner?" Olivia pulled out another folder and passed it forward. "Signed documents. Bank logs. And this," she flipped to the final page, "is an email between Carolyn Monroe and the firm's registered agent, discussing ways to secure access to primary assets via legal instrument if resistance persists." Judge Wade stared at the document for a long time. Then she looked up and said something I'll never forget. "I would like the district attorney's office to be present for this. The petition is no longer about guardianship, it appears to be part of a broader conspiracy to commit financial fraud." There was a shuffle in the back of the courtroom. A man in a gray suit stood and walked forward. He'd been there the whole time. Watching. "We're prepared to open a case, Your Honor," he said. My mother blinked. It was the first time I'd ever seen her look afraid. Genuinely, deeply afraid. Not angry. Not offended. Just exposed. The judge tapped her pen once, then turned back to Olivia. Do you have anything further? Yes, Olivia said. We have one more witness. The door at the back opened. And in walked Sophia. Connor's ex. Dressed in all black. Hair tied neatly. Calm. Clear-eyed. She walked to the stand and was sworn in. Her voice didn't shake once. I was in a relationship with Connor Monroe for 3 years, she said. During that time, I was emotionally manipulated, financially exploited, and pressured to stay silent. She played the recording, Connor shouting, demanding money, calling her useless when she refused. And then my mother's voice again, if you really love him, you'll make sacrifices. Otherwise, I'll make sure you're forgotten. The judge's lips pressed together. She made no comment, just added another note to her file. When Sophia stepped down, Olivia turned to the bench. That concludes our evidence, Your Honor. Judge Wade folded her hands. Very well. Petitioners, do you wish to respond? Carolyn stood. She didn't look at me. Not once. Your Honor, I only wanted to protect my daughter. That may sound contradictory now, but she's always been fragile. Olivia stood like a lightning strike. Fragile? Ms. Monroe is a financial director at a Fortune 500 company, holds 2 degrees from Ivy League institutions, owns her home outright, and has no medical history of mental illness or instability. Carolyn finally turned to me. Her voice softened, too late. I just didn't want to lose you, Geraldine. The judge's eyes narrowed. That's not what this petition suggests. What it does suggest is that you were prepared to exploit your daughter, strip her of legal control over her life, and redirect financial assets in favor of your son. Do you deny that? There was a pause. Then she whispered, no. Connor's head dropped. And for the first time in his life, he looked ashamed. The judge stood. This court finds no grounds to support the conservatorship petition. In fact, the court finds the petition to be an abuse of the legal process for personal gain. Effective immediately, the petitioners are barred from accessing, discussing, or interfering in any matter related to Ms. Monroe's legal, medical, or financial affairs. Her eyes moved to the district attorney. I formally refer this case for criminal investigation. This court is adjourned. The gavel came down like thunder. And just like that, it was over. But it didn't feel like triumph. As the room emptied, my mother stood still. Her back was to me. I watched her shoulders rise and fall. My father looked at the floor, hands clasped tightly. I walked past them. Not slowly. Not dramatically. Just with finality. I didn't speak. Because silence, now, was mine to give. Outside the courthouse, Olivia hugged me. Hard. You won, she said. No, I whispered. I ended it. 3 weeks later, I received the official court ruling. Attached was a formal compensation order, $200,000 in damages for emotional distress, legal fees, and reputational harm. To be jointly paid by Carolyn and Joseph Monroe. The letter was signed by Judge Wade herself. I stared at the number for a long time. But it wasn't the money that made me cry. It was the line at the bottom, the court finds no evidence of mental unfitness. Ms. Monroe's independence is protected. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Then I picked up the phone and called the county clerk's office. I'd like to file for a legal name change, I said. To what? The clerk asked. I smiled softly. Geraldine Hart. It was time to reclaim the name of the only parent who'd ever tried to protect me, the one they'd erased from every photo, every memory, every document. My real father. The day my name officially changed to Geraldine Hart, I stood in the county clerk's office, signing the final form with a pen that trembled just slightly between my fingers. When the clerk handed me the updated certificate, I felt something shift, not loudly, not with fanfare, but with the subtle force of a door finally unlocking. I no longer belonged to a name that had been used to trap me. That wasn't just a legal shift, it was a spiritual one. Outside, the wind bit through my coat. It was late November in Cincinnati, and the sky was the color of steel. But I didn't feel cold. I felt light. I took a cab straight to Mount Vernon Cemetery. Thomas Hart's grave sat quietly beneath a modest maple tree, bare now of its golden leaves. I hadn't come here before, not since the DNA results. But today, I brought something with me. A laminated copy of the test. And a letter. I knelt beside the headstone and placed both gently against the stone. "You never got to meet me," I whispered. "But you were there. In ways I'm only just beginning to understand." The wind picked up. A lone leaf spun to the ground beside me. I stood and looked out across the rows of tombstones, then whispered the name that still felt new and strange and mine. Geraldine Hart. The next chapter didn't begin with revenge. It began with silence. But that silence didn't last long. Because a week after the hearing, I was contacted by the assistant DA, requesting a formal deposition. The investigation into Carolyn and Joseph Monroe had been escalated. Fraud. Document tampering. Misuse of funds. Potential perjury. They asked if I'd be willing to provide all documentation, recordings, and written statements. "I've already got them organized in binders," I replied. The assistant DA paused, then laughed softly. "Something tells me you've been waiting for this moment." "Not waiting. Preparing." The Monroe name started to shift in whispers. Friends of the family pulled back. Social circles once obsessed with perfection suddenly went quiet. My mother's presence at fundraisers, luncheons, and country club events disappeared. Joseph, I'd heard, was traveling, a convenient euphemism for shame. But Connor? He reached out. Again. This time through a letter. Handwritten. 2 pages long. "I didn't know they would go that far," he wrote. "I was just desperate. I thought they were helping me. I never meant for you to get hurt." There was no apology. Just a confession of cowardice, dressed up as sincerity. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new file on my laptop. The name, the Hart Foundation. Mission, to support young adults who had been emotionally or financially abused by their families. Scholarships. Legal resources. A mentorship program for children in foster care who had been deemed difficult or uncooperative. I used the $200,000 court-ordered compensation as the seed fund. Olivia helped me file the 501c3 paperwork. The first time I walked into the tiny office I rented downtown, nothing was furnished except a desk and a lamp. But I didn't need luxury. I needed purpose. I set down a framed photo of me and Olivia from college, and a small plaque engraved with 4 words. "You are not alone." Within weeks, applications began rolling in. One was from a girl named Rena, 17, kicked out of her house for refusing to co-sign her stepfather's loan. No support. No school. No safety net. Another was from a boy named Micah, 19. Legally emancipated after his parents tried to force him into the family business by threatening to sue him for wasting tuition. I read each story carefully. And in every one, I saw a version of myself. Struggling to be seen. Fighting to prove they were more than a wallet or a scapegoat. But one application stopped me cold. Name, Elena T. Monroe. Age, 16. Relationship, niece. She had written, in barely legible cursive. "They say I'm too dramatic. But I just want someone to believe I'm not crazy. I just want to go to school without pretending everything's perfect." I felt my throat close. I had never met her. Joseph's brother had passed away years ago. I didn't even know he had a daughter. But there she was. Reaching out, unknowingly, to the one person who truly understood. I called Olivia. Can we take minors? With the right legal partners, yes. Good, I said. Because we're starting now. Within 48 hours, we had a caseworker assigned to Elena. I didn't tell her who I was. I didn't want her to feel indebted. I just made sure she got what I never did, help without strings. Meanwhile, back in the world of polished smiles and social status, Carolyn Monroe was under federal investigation for conspiracy to commit fraud and perjury in a family court proceeding. She refused a plea. Her trial date was set for January. I wasn't planning to attend. But I would make sure she saw my name on the list of official witnesses. So she'd know I was watching. Not from behind. Not from below. But from above. On my terms. I never expected this kind of ending. I didn't want vengeance anymore. I wanted clarity. And I had it. They tried to write me out of their story. But I wrote a better one. The first snow of winter dusted the sidewalk the morning I received the subpoena. I hadn't expected to be formally called as a witness in my mother's criminal trial, but there it was. My name, printed clean and bold, Geraldine Hart, key witness for the prosecution. Olivia reviewed the details with me over coffee at our usual spot. They're charging her with 3 counts, she said, tapping the file. Fraudulent filing of legal documents, attempted financial coercion under false pretenses, and conspiracy to defraud a legal heir. And Joseph? He accepted a plea deal. 6 months probation, restitution, and full forfeiture of his financial power of attorney rights. So he had folded. Typical. My so-called father had always played the obedient patriarch while letting Carolyn pull the strings. But when the fire got too close, he ran for cover and left her to burn. I didn't feel sorry for either of them. I didn't feel anything. By then, the Hart Foundation had processed its 40th application. We had helped 2 young women win legal independence from their abusive guardians, placed 5 scholarship recipients into college support programs, and connected a dozen more to mental health resources. What started as my therapy had become something far bigger. And then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. A soft knock on the door of the foundation office one Tuesday afternoon. I opened it to find Connor. Worn-out sneakers. Puffy eyes. His once meticulously styled hair now disheveled. He looked 10 years older than the last time I'd seen him in person. "Can I talk to you?" he asked. Every instinct in my body said no. But I stepped aside and let him in. He sat on the edge of the visitor chair like someone unsure of whether they were welcome. Because he wasn't. Not really. I don't know how to say this, he began, hands clasped tightly between his knees. But I'm sorry. I didn't know what they were doing. Not all of it. I stayed silent. I thought, if we could just fix things, we'd be a family again. We were never a family, I said. We were a hierarchy. And I was always at the bottom. He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I didn't come for money. Or forgiveness. I just came to say, you didn't deserve what happened. And I hope what you're doing now gives people what we never had. That caught me off guard. I studied him. The sun caught the lines under his eyes, the twitch in his jaw. For once, he didn't seem like the golden boy. He looked like someone who had finally seen himself clearly in the mirror, and didn't like what he found. Thank you, I said. He stood, hesitated, then walked to the door. Before he left, he turned and asked, "Do you ever miss any of it?" No, I replied. But sometimes I miss who I thought we were. He gave a small nod, then disappeared into the snowy street. The next morning, I took the stand. The courtroom looked smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I just felt taller. Carolyn sat at the defense table, flanked by 2 attorneys. Her pearl earrings were gone. Her makeup was minimal. For once, there was no pretense of perfection, just a woman facing the fallout of her own ambition. I took a deep breath as the prosecutor asked me the first question. Ms. Hart, can you describe your relationship with the defendant? She's my mother. Biologically, no. But legally, for most of my life, yes. And can you describe the petition she filed against you? She claimed I was mentally unfit. That I needed a conservator. But in reality, she wanted access to my assets. Why do you believe she did that? I looked at Carolyn. Because I stopped complying. And she didn't know how to love someone she couldn't control. There was a ripple of whispers behind me. I stayed composed. I explained the financial trail. The forged documents. The lies layered under layers of false concern. Every word I spoke was backed by evidence already submitted. But what mattered most was how I said it, clearly, calmly, without bitterness. Because that's what true power looks like. After the trial, the court ruled swiftly. Carolyn was found guilty on all counts. Sentencing was scheduled for March. The recommendation, 2 years in prison, suspended in exchange for full restitution and mandatory psychological evaluation. It wasn't jail time. But it was enough to dismantle her kingdom of mirrors. She would lose her standing. Her reputation. Her ability to wield legal influence. And, perhaps worst of all for her, control. That night, Olivia and I stood on the balcony of my apartment. Snow fell in soft flakes. The city lights below twinkled like embers. You did it, she said, raising a glass of wine. No, I replied. We did it. She smiled, then added, so what's next? I looked out across the skyline. Thought about the letters I still read each morning. The stories of hurt and hope written in shaky handwriting from young people who didn't have anyone else. I think it's time to take this national, I said. The Hart Foundation deserves to reach more than just Ohio. Olivia grinned. And you deserve to write the next chapter. I nodded, the snow melting quietly into the night around us. The past was finished. But my purpose was only beginning. Spring arrived quietly in Cincinnati, but everything inside me had changed. By March, the Hart Foundation had expanded into 3 new cities, Louisville, Indianapolis, and Pittsburgh. What began as a lifeline for the forgotten had turned into a movement. We'd partnered with law students, social workers, and trauma counselors. Each week, I received handwritten letters from survivors thanking us for believing them when no one else did. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. No calls from my mother. No veiled threats. No guilt-wrapped demands disguised as family obligations. Just peace. Until the sentencing day came. I almost didn't go. I told myself it was done. I didn't need to see her again. But Olivia urged me. Closure isn't about them, she said. It's about you. Standing in the place they tried to bury you and realizing you're still standing. So I went. Courtroom 4B. The same judge. A different tone. Carolyn Monroe sat in her usual pale suit. But this time, her hands trembled. There were no smiles. No jury to charm. No audience to manipulate. Just a judge, a prosecutor, and the consequences she'd never believed would catch up to her. The judge addressed her calmly. Mrs. Monroe, this court finds your actions to be manipulative, premeditated, and emotionally exploitative. You weaponized the legal system against your own daughter. While we acknowledge your age and lack of prior criminal record, we cannot excuse the damage you caused. She was sentenced to 24 months of probation with mandatory mental health counseling. $200,000 in restitution to be paid to the Hart Foundation, redirected from her assets. A permanent ban from filing any legal motion involving Geraldine Hart or her estate. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, lips tight, like a woman who realized the audience was gone and the spotlight would never return. As I left the courthouse, the sky split open with the first thunder of spring. I didn't run. I let the rain soak me. Because I wasn't hiding anymore. 6 months later, the Heart Foundation had opened its first scholarship housing unit for estranged teens in Dayton. We called it the Grove, a place where healing could grow in peace. It had a library, a garden, and soundproof counseling rooms. No one there was called too much or too broken. They were simply called by their names. Names that mattered. Names they chose. One evening, I walked through the hallway of the Grove and saw a girl curled on the floor, headphones in, a journal open in her lap. She looked up. It was Elena. My niece. She knew who I was now. We'd talked. Carefully. Slowly. At her pace. She didn't ask about her grandmother or father. Just about the foundation. And how we made it real. I want to help, she said one day. You already are, I replied. A month later, she gave her first speech at a donor event. She read her story, hands shaking, voice strong. When she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Including mine. That fall, I sat down in my apartment and opened a new journal. On the first page, I wrote. I was once told I was unstable, dramatic, ungrateful. But none of those labels ever belonged to me. They were projections from people afraid of what they couldn't control. And I'm done living by someone else's script. I titled it, The Unchosen One, a memoir of rewriting family and finding freedom. It became a bestseller within months. Not because I was famous, but because I was familiar. My story wasn't rare. It was just rarely told aloud. At the book launch, a young woman stood up, clutching her own copy. She asked, if you could go back and tell your younger self anything, what would it be? I smiled. I'd tell her that surviving doesn't make you damaged. It makes you dangerous, to people who live by controlling others. Applause broke out, but I barely heard it. Because in that moment, I realized. This wasn't a story about revenge anymore. It was a story about liberation. About using the truth as a scalpel, not to wound, but to cut away everything that had once tried to silence me. Final thoughts. My name is Geraldine Hart. I was erased from my family the moment I stopped being useful. But I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. And now, every letter we receive, every kid we shelter, every courtroom victory for someone who thought they were powerless. That's my revenge. Not screaming. Not burning bridges. But thriving so brightly, they can't stand the glare. Because I am no longer theirs to control. And no one, not even the people who raised me, will ever write my story for me again. Geraldine's journey is a raw, emotional reminder that real power doesn't come from money, titles, or family names. It comes from reclaiming your story, and refusing to be erased. If you've ever felt like the unchosen one, know this, your worth is not up for debate. And your silence was never proof of guilt. What would you have done in Geraldine's shoes? Have you ever had to walk away from family to save yourself? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more powerful stories like this one. Because sometimes, the loudest revenge is simply telling the truth.